Hello and welcome to The Living Fossil, and I'm Jordi Hernandez. In this episode will be a discussion about evolution, Charles Darwin, and creationism. Joining me in the second half will be my recurring co-host Dylan Weiss. And now, without further ado, sit back, relax, and enjoy this episode of The Living Fossil. As I'm recording right now, I'm filming live on a platform called Clapper, and it's a lot like TikTok, and the difference is that you don't have the same video making features as TikTok does. You can record a video, but you don't have like the ability to use a green screen and add music and stuff like that. And maybe you would use other platforms to add music. Anyways, I'm going to start off by using this old presentation from a PowerPoint I made for a college class called Public Speaking. And it is about evolution and creationism. So let's say one day you see somebody driving a car, and the car in front of you or behind you has a fish of some kind, like taped to their bumper, and it either says Darwin or Jesus on it. And the one that says Darwin on it has legs on it, and then you have you also have one that, like I said, that says Jesus on it, but it has no legs. I actually own both of these fish, and I have them in my office. I would put them on a car, but I don't own one yet. And if any of you who are watching on Clapper don't have a belief in evolution or do believe in evolution, then I understand either way. And I'm not doing this to attack anybody who is a creationist or believes in intelligent design. This isn't to correct them or argue with them in any way. So anyways, here's what I've written on the PowerPoint presentation that I will share with you, which is, it can be easily seen in the macro world and moves in a very fast pace at the same time. So there is really good evidence of evolution. Again, really good evidence of evolution, which is if you look at what's going on with like bacteria or any kind of living organism in that realm, which we can't see unless we look at it through a microscope. And in the microscope, we could probably see some little living organism change at a faster pace, but at the same time, in the macro world, you can't really see it happening. It's happening, but you just can't see it because it's happening so terribly slow, and it's more slower than we could possibly imagine. And because of how terribly slow it is in the world of larger animals, which is the macro world, as I said, it cannot be seen at all. But in both realms, depending on the circumstances, any creature will develop new ways to survive and deal with the issues they had a different time overcoming or had no chance to live through at all. So the example is like meerkats and us humans. So I want to share a quote from Charles Darwin that he shared in the in the Origin of Species, a book that he written back in his lifetime. And it says, They generally differ more from each other than do the individuals of any one species or variety in a state of nature. And if we reflect on the vast variety on the plants and animals which have been cultivated and which have varied during all ages under the most difficult climates and treatment, we are driven to conclude that this great variability is due to our domestic productions having been raised under conditions of life not so uniform as, and somewhat different from, those to which the parent species had been exposed under nature. So, if you look at like maybe the time of like the age of exploration, or maybe the time, I won't get into that right now, but so let's say you brought like a lizard that came from the rainforest originally, and you brought it to the desert, any kind of desert in the world, not to mention the Sahara, and it ends up like escaping, and then it wanders the desert, or somehow or maybe in some other way it gets let loose, and it lets itself loose into the desert. But anyways, you would notice that if the lizard is wandering around the desert in a climate that it has not been so much used to, yeah, you can comment, but anyways, it's not used to this climate. There's like maybe not a body of water nearby in sight, and it's got to look for food, and it's got to do everything it can to. Actually, here's a better example. If you ever seen the movie Castaway with Tom Hanks, after his FedEx plane crashes out in the middle of oceanic nowhere, he has to find a way to like live on that island until he was rescued. So he is like, after he ends up there one night, he has to like do whatever it takes to survive while he's like thousands of miles away from civilization. And so it takes some time to adapt to the way the island is, because there's like no villages there's no running water, toilets, you name anything that you would find in any kind of like human civilization, such as like New York or Los Angeles, Sydney, Australia, you name it. And so he like grabs, like, let's say he grabs a stick thingy, and it's shown in the movie that he uses it to catch a crab by stabbing it and then cooking it in the fire, and he does everything to like try to start a fire until he succeeds after he gets hurt doing it, and then he ends up living on the island for like 4 years according to the plot of the movie. And I've seen the movie myself a long time ago. And there's also the moment that is seen days after he ends up on the island, and he's going through all these like survival techniques to make sure he lives day by day when there's like no grocery store and no refrigerator full of food, and just anything that you're so used to living in within your own environment. Which is like using a volleyball to make it as a makeshift person, and he makes a face on it by accidentally putting a bleeding hand on it, and he leaves the bloody handprint on there, and he names it after Wilson, after the brand. So he talks to it again, pretending somebody's there. I don't mean to get off topic, but at least you know what I mean. And there's a good example that's from another quote by a gentleman who goes by the name of John Lofty Wiseman. He's the author of what's known as the SAS Survival Handbook, and you might have not have heard of it or seen it before, but or maybe you have. And he is a former SAS serviceman, and he quotes in this very book, "The human species has established itself in almost every corner of the earth, even in territories too inhospitable to provide a regular home. Mankind has found a way to exploit its resources, whether by hunting or taking wealth from the ground, and has often pitted his skills against nature simply for the satisfaction of doing so." And the Tom Hanks Castaway example fits this fits this explanation, because he's in a place that seemed to be hospitable for him, but he's found a way to work around it. Now, I'm going to move on to creationism. Well, actually, before I move on to creationism, I want to talk about this myth where he where it's believed that he ends up on his deathbed saying that he renounces his it's believed that he renounces his belief on evolution that he's known to be an expert in, and then convert to Christianity. But let's say, according to this Google search thing that I saved after I clipped it off from the snipping tool, and it says the claim that Charles Darwin renounced evolution or converted to Christianity on his deathbed is an urban myth. So Darwin never recanted his scientific work or skepticism towards religious dogma. He remained a strong advocate for evolution through natural selection throughout his life. So if anybody has actually told you that, just kind of ignore that. And anybody who is living in Britain watching this, and I do believe it's an urban myth, and it's absolutely not true, and I can't see Charles Darwin ever saying that, even before he's even before he was dying on his bed and just waiting for his last moments to arrive on Earth. And that's just absolutely crazy. And let's see what it says about Darwin's beliefs. Darwin was a devout skeptic throughout his life, expressing doubts about the existence of God and questioning the claims of organized religion. Well, unlike Darwin, I don't have the same beliefs as he does. I'm not a skeptic towards the existence of God, and I myself am a Roman Catholic, so I'm an evolutionist Roman Catholic, and my church does have a positive take on evolution itself, and I'm going to talk more about that in the second half when my friend Dylan comes on. And and there are Catholics that defy evolution, but I don't know how many do defy evolution, but I'm guessing it's like a slight minority. Yeah, I'm so happy to be live too. Thank you for the comment. Thank you so much for the comment. Once again, I'm happy to be live too, filming this episode for my podcast live on this very platform. And again, for any of you who are listening to this episode of the podcast, I'm recording this live, and it's on Clapper, which is a lot like TikTok. I would have done it on TikTok as well, but I don't have the requirements met to be able for me to do that. So anyway, on to the creationism part. And so creationists tend to believe that the earth and all living things were officially created by God in a 6-day period taking place some 1,000 years ago, and they do not intend to acknowledge evolutionary theories. Well, I do have respect for the creationists, and I do understand how they feel. But again, I'm not I'm not doing this to attack them or correct them in any way, and this is just my understanding and giving a discussion about both subjects. I mean, all three subjects, since I'm also talking about Charles Darwin. And let's see, let me go to one of my other saved beliefs. Yeah, let's see. Theory posits. There's also the intelligent design I'm also going to talk about, but I'll get into that a little later, and I'll also talk about that in the second half. So, according to Google, creationism is a belief system that posits the universe and life were created by a divine being, often God. Again, this is the Google definition. And as I was saying, as described in religious texts, particularly the Bible, it stands in contrast to evolutionary biology. Good night. Sorry, my mom was telling me good night. Anyways, it stands in contrast to evolutionary biology, which explains the development of life through natural process. Well, yeah, like being raised in the Catholic Church, I was not really indoctrinated by how I should believe and what is believed by any Sunday school teachers or the priest giving a homily or my youth ministers, like in their meetings and during class sessions or during Mass, talking about evolution. So throughout my life, listening to these talks, and from 2000 to right now, I never heard of a single homily or lesson in Sunday school or from the youth ministers running the meetings about anything that has to do with evolution. They never really talked about it. Again, they never talked about it. I was never indoctrinated on how I should feel about evolution. And my mom was volunteering for Denver's Museum of Nature and Science for over 20 years, and she never was against it either. And I never learned about how some churches feel about evolution until I met one of my good friends who I've known since high school, and his church teaches how they feel about evolution, and so he was indoctrinated about how he should feel about it. But I could be wrong, or maybe he was just giving simple lessons on what to think about evolution and how and why it should be defied. And yeah, it's just, well, I'm not saying it's ridiculous or it's a bunch of this or it's a bunch of that. So again, I'm not here to attack anyone who's a creationist, and I'm not here to correct them. And let's see, special creation. Let's see what that says. Creationism often emphasizes the concept of special creation, where God's creative actions are distinct and not part of ongoing natural processes. Let's see, let me read that again. Let's see, I don't know how I'm going to explain that, but maybe on my own time I'll study that statement. And let's see, there's also the similar notion or theory known as intelligent design, or ID for short, is a theory that posits that certain features of the universe and of living things are best explained by an intelligent cause rather than undirected processes like natural selection. So before I started doing this live, before before I started filming this recording this episode. Sorry for the starting once more. But anyway, I looked up to see if intelligent design was like another term for creationism, and according to Google, it's not. But if you correct me if I'm wrong or if Google's wrong, but I do think, in my opinion, that they do sound similar. And earlier I was watching a video on YouTube, and it pointed out some really good detail on what we should know about intelligent design, such as like if certain things, like let's say you talked about like watches, and it's and if a watch was made, it's got to have like somebody who's made it. Somebody would have had made that watch. Or here's this pineapple toy that I got from my university, and someone like should have made this pineapple. It couldn't be made out of nothing. It couldn't be made like by nobody. It's not possible that nobody had made this pineapple. I can understand where intelligent design's going, but I can't embrace it at the same time. But I do believe that God had created the universe, and he would be behind the process of evolution. He would be behind the Big Bang and all that stuff you would know about how the universe came to be. And if anybody who's a creationist listening to this and is watching this on my live broadcasting on Clapper, I'm not doing this to attack anyone who is a creationist. I don't mean to keep repeating that, but again, I'm not attacking anybody who's a creationist or is an affiliate of intelligent design. That's not what I'm here to do, and I'm not here to correct them. I'm just here to give a discussion on what evolution and all the others I said is, as well as Charles Darwin and those two things I just mentioned seconds ago. So that concludes my first half of this episode. And now joining me for the second half is my good friend Dylan Weiss. So the first thing I want to talk about is the Catholic Church's view on evolution. And so according to Google, it says the Catholic Church generally accepts evolution as a scientific theory explaining the development of life, but not in a way that contradicts Christian teachings on creation and the soul. The Church views evolution as a process guided by God rather than as a random, undirected process. And the churches that do accept evolution, of course, is the Catholic Church, as I just mentioned before. And then there's the Episcopal Church, the United Methodist Church, Presbyterian Church, Evangelical Lutheran Church, and the United Church of Christ. And you know that, and I was just explaining in the first half that I myself am a Catholic, and I was not indoctrinated in Sunday school or a youth group meeting about evolution or taught what to believe about evolution or to defy it or not. So they didn't say you have a choice to either believe it or not, and they never really talked about it as far as I remember.
Right. I think a lot of people, obviously, Charles Darwin himself, personally, he didn't debate evolution with the Catholic Church. However, Hubert Huxley, kind of one of his, I wouldn't say follower, but, an advocate for evolutionary science, did debate some bishops and actually won debates with that. Also, I do want to point out the Unitarian Church, which is a very kind of a left-leaning church. actually even Charles Darwin himself was a part of, actually supports evolution as well. Um, and as a matter of fact, early in Charles Darwin's life, he did want to become a clergyman or a minister before when he was at Cambridge University before eventually going into the science of biology. So a lot of people don't know that, and it's kind of the irony in that Charles Darwin's views on or on religion actually evolved, no pun intended, throughout his life. And so often he said that as science, as being part of the scientific field, there's no way you can either prove or disprove there being a God. So it's a very agnostic views personally of his life. He's kind of more private about that than most people realize. He was not about. People forget that evolution and science is not about teaching atheism. It's very inclusive, actually. I mean, you can be a Catholic, you can be an evangelical and teach evolution and learn evolution and become an evolutionary scientist. It's really for everyone. It's not its own religion. Science is not a religion. So,
of course, I wasn't taught if it was a religion or not either. I never believed that it was a religion either. I'm not correct you or anything, so you're cool.
People think it's about atheism. It's about converting to atheism. We're not. I mean, atheism is not a religion in itself. I mean, a lot of people think of it that way, but it's not really. And as a matter of fact, John Paul II kind of was. I mean, the first one I know in my lifetime about coming out and saying instead of accepting Darwin, Charles Darwin's theory of evolution, that it's more than just a hypothesis. It's more than just that there's very solid evidence supporting that scientific theory. So
I remember him saying that he embraces it. I can't remember, like it was both John the 23rd and John Paul II who actually embraced it. I'm trying to find out what it was exactly they said. Let's see, where is it here?
I think he used the word theory, but what he really meant was hypothesis. So it's more than just a hypothesis. What he said is more than just a theory. It's sort of hypothesis. You can look it up on Google it. And even the late Pope Francis as well. Both the late Pope John Paul II. And what was the other one you mentioned?
I think it was John the 23rd. Pope John the 23rd.
John the 23rd. Oh yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, let's see. I'm trying to find out where it says that here. Well, I don't want to. Yeah. I don't want to spend too much time trying to find out what it is.
Right.
But I want to.
John was actually one of the people that John Paul I contributed a lot of his, his rise to becoming Pope, and also Paul as well. I think that was the 20th, I believe, Paul. Yeah, so it's just his predecessors, not John Paul II, the one we're talking about, the prior to one. Yeah,
the John Paul I, right?
Yeah, John Paul. Yeah, it was very short-lived Pope. The second took his namesake from. Let's see. I think it was the 22nd. Yeah. Just trying to pull up my notes here. Give me a second. I think that a lot of people's views, and I mean, really, and I think people have to make their own discretion, and of course, especially with their own faith, sometimes people, I was thinking of Paul VI, that was the one prior to John Paul I. Obviously, sometimes I think that, I can't speak for, people's own, denominations or even their own, church, but, there are some that are more open and some are obviously closed where you can't talk about it, especially in your own faith, when you're you're with a clergyman, how your personal views. I think personally, I think if you're going to have something like, any kind of denomination, the more inclusive you are, the better, more likely to you get people to join them, the more accepting you are.
Yeah.
I
Now I
have a
want
couple
to.
topics.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Dylan.
Okay. No, I'm actually done. You go. What were we
Anyway,
gonna
so
say?
I want to next get to the churches that do reject evolution itself, the biological Darwinian evolution, or at least that's what I call it. But I do know they for sure, like everybody for sure calls it Darwinian evolution. And the list here of churches that are in defiance of the Darwinian evolution itself is the Southern Baptist Convention, Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, the Assemblies of God, Church of God, Seventh-day Adventists, Pentecostal churches. Before I continue on down the list with just 4 more of them that I got here, I have a really good friend who himself is a Pentecostal, but I'm not going to name anybody here just for the safety and respect of their privacy here. And he was one person that was like educated on how to like believe about evolution, and I'm sure that he's listened to sermons by a pastor in the services he's gone to in the past. And he tried to like, I remember him trying to like teach somebody or what to know about evolution. And like, I don't know if I told him not to listen to that or not, but I don't remember saying anything to him about like, don't listen to what he says about evolution, but that's just his own belief and I respect it. And I generally wouldn't want to argue with him, but I remember seeing a guy on the campus of NMSU holding a sign that talks about his defiance of evolution, and he discussed it with like several students who went up to him, and I remember like riding in a golf cart. It was like some special event day, and 2 women who were riding in a golf cart offered to give a ride somewhere, and they were staff of the college, and I accepted the offer to ride in it. And just as I was riding by the guy, I kind of did something stupid by just shouting out that evolution is not fake or whatever it was, and that there's evidence. And yeah, but I don't care if he ignored me or not. But like I said, so anyways, so continuing on down the list, and among the others are Jehovah's Witnesses, the Calvary Chapel, the Church of God in Christ, and the International Circle of Faith. I don't think I ever heard the last one below or the one before that, as well as Calvary Chapel. But whatever from Jehovah's Witnesses on up, from what I read on the list here, is the ones I basically have heard of. And again, with that guy on campus, like he's one person who's basically wrong, and because in my opinion, the source why I believe that he is wrong, because there is what I believe to be strong evidence of that evolution is happening in an actual process, but it's happening much more faster in the micro world, which we know is like where we know in the realm is inhabited by bacteria and then penicillin, like the whole 9 yards. And we have like in the macro world, we have like the whales and dolphins and all those other creatures we know about. But in our world, that same world that I just mentioned, is that it happens in an extremely slow process than we could possibly imagine, or less. At least that's what I believe, in my opinion, as well. And it's much slower than the pace of a turtle, or maybe in the much slower pace than how fast the continents are still moving to this day, which is the source of why the supercontinent we knew as Pangea split up.
Right. I was going to add this kind of side but or a kind of a random fact, but the one that you mentioned that kind of reject evolution. Seventh-day Adventists. That was where the Kellogg family were under that. They were that's one of their reasons why they invented vegetarian foods like their cornflakes and the cereals that they have in the grocery store aisle because of that. Kind of like kind of probably going similar to like certain Jewish foods that are supposed to be plain. They're just not supposed to enjoy them that much. But anyway, that's just totally side note and kind of random. But I just thought that was just interesting. As a matter of fact, I think a lot of people I know that there's Seventh-day Adventist practice vegetarianism, but I just thought that's kind of a cool little factoid. Anyway. I don't know, we're kind of like on the same topic, if you've heard of Ken Ham and he's an Australian Christian who's very anti-evolution. He debated Bill Nye the Science Guy on it, and how his views of different animals, in contrast to evolution and similar shared characteristics, he groups them as he calls kinds. There's different kinds. There's different kinds of birds. There's different kind of mammals, and we didn't originate from each other, but they're in a certain group that God created. It's kind of like it's a very kind of closed-minded thing. So even I remember watching the debate, they really didn't kind of answer the questions and really have a good rebuttal. He did leave a trap for Bill Nye, in which he tried to. Bill Nye talked about he was supposed to respond to why there's sometimes newer fossils in older fossil beds, or older fossils in newer fossils, and Bill Nye responded with unconformity that the layers got in, but then, how would they? Get him followed up as no, we're talking about trapped in. The answer, it was an okay answer, but the real answer was reworking. It's a very difficult process in paleontology when you get an old fossil that gets embedded in newer rock, or vice versa. It's reworking. It's a very complicated problem for paleontologists to figure that out. And then eventually, carbon date, or not carbon date, but potassium argon dating, you're able to figure out the actual age and why it's in there. So anyway. I think that's all I got on that part. But I think a lot of people also confuse Charles Darwin's the saying that the survival of the fittest. That was actually coined by Herbert Spencer.
Oh yeah, I remember that. I have heard about that.
Yeah, Charles Darwin's book. Yeah, and eventually Charles Darwin himself adopted that phrase. I can't remember if Alfred Wallace, the co-founder of evolution, came up with the idea of natural selection on his own independently. Also came up with that. But they're very similar ideas. And natural selection is kind of like survival of the fittest. But sometimes, one trait might favor you in one situation, and another trait might favor someone else in a different situation, depending on how it is. So it's not always survival of the fittest, and that's why it is kind of natural selection. But eventually you can see why that is. Like if you can run faster from a predator, you're more likely to survive in that situation. And then people even forget that evolution, that theory predates even Darwin and Alfred and Wallace before that, and then Lamarckian evolution. There was just a problem in that there's a wrong explanation of why that occurs. And if you work out in the gym and you gain muscles, you're not going to have muscular babies. That's just not how that works.
There's also the fact that Hitler kind of took the notion way too far. And there's an old classic Disney cartoon that shares a really good example of that, which shows a random German student is being indoctrinated on how he should feel about the weak in comparison to the strong, and it shows a fox and a rabbit, and the rabbit is getting of course preyed on by the fox, pounced on and then eaten up. And the German boy's that poor little rabbit, how sad. and the teacher in the classroom is like screaming at him and say, "How dare you? That is not, that is totally like unacceptable," and forces him to march into a corner. And then another student is asked by the instructor the same question about how they should feel about the rabbit, and they said the rabbit is weak. It should be despised because of that. We honor the fox because it's like big and strong and powerful, stuff like that. And then the little boy stands up and since he realizes what the heck is going on, he decides to come to realization and correct the way he reacted to the situation, and decided to say, "Forget the rabbit. I hate the rabbit. It is weak and powerless. I adore the fox."
Interesting. Yeah. Kind of like a parallel to modern days the idea of indoctrinating from teachers and stuff like that, which is false. But yeah, that's very strange. So you said there was a propaganda comic, or what was it?
No, it was a Disney cartoon showing a like an animated illustration of an old classic book called Education and Death, and what is believed to be what they're actually like educating the young Germans educating the young Germans in order to get them ready for what lies ahead, which is like fighting on the battlefield. And it also talks about like what the state wants him to do, say, or think or feel. And plus, well, I think that's all I have to say about that. But it's a really interesting video. You should check it out.
Yeah, I did see, not quite related, but early or Disney and Warner Brothers, Looney Tune propaganda animations did get people enlisted in the World War II. But yeah, I mean, even we had our own, but like obviously not to the nasty extremism that Nazi Germany did. But yeah, it was interesting. I'll have to check that out after this podcast. I'd like to see that. But yeah, interesting.
Yeah. The next thing I want to talk about, and then after that is, well, I want to also get to the creation and intelligent design. Now, there was what I've read in a book and what I heard from somebody, but I found out it was a myth at the end of the day, like years after, which was like around now. And according to a source I looked up, well, before I get to that, there was the story of Charles Darwin on his deathbed saying, "Never mind, there is no evolution." Not exactly what he said, but that's how he said it, and then he was gone. But according to this source, it says the claim that Charles Darwin renounced evolution or converted to Christianity on his deathbed is an urban myth. Darwin never resented his scientific work or his skepticism towards religious dogma. He remained a strong advocate for evolution through natural selection throughout his life.
Yeah. Even though as a matter of fact, his wife, Emma Darwin, helped him edit his book, even though she was a very passionate, Christian, and, they had her doubts. Even Charles Lyell, who Darwin got his ideas of, unification or I'm sorry, that the process of the same events that happened in the past are the same events geologically that happen right now. So, but anyway, I digress. But both of them were skeptic of evolution. However, they helped him, in defending his views. And but yeah, it's interesting. As a matter of fact, the one you pointed out, Intelligent Design, it actually is a textbook for it. It's the only textbook that I know of. It's called Pandas in People. It's a really kind of a debunked pseudoscience textbook, but it's out there. It was published back in 1989, and then they did a second edition in '93. but usually the argument is that you look at things like the Cambrian explosion. It's like, hey, looks like a creation event. There's some creator behind this, the curtains, kind of directing these things and having things. There's no evolution. I mean, yes, we came from chimpanzees or we came from apes, but there's some guide that's helping us come this direction. It's like a upward, progression. That's just. And it's just, I mean, that's obviously false because we did have things before the Cambrian explosion. We did have other animals, but obviously just the phylums that we know today. I mean, phylums are groups of animals that we know today is when those came about and they evolved. So
that part with the ape coming from apes has just reminded me of that same friend I was just talking about when we were in the museum one time. It was like back in, I think, 2005, if I remember correctly. But it was like a long time ago, and we were in that dinosaur exhibit, Prehistoric Journey, at Denver's museum, and he was saying, like when we were thinking about maybe wanting to do or go see next or something, he says, I don't want to go look at the ape because I don't come from an ape. And again, that's just according to his church's doctrine and how he was indoctrinated with all that. I'm not saying this against him or the church about how they taught him in his, how they give him his religious education and sermons over his years growing up in the church he went to all his life. And but I thought I thought at first, at least, that that intelligent design and creationism are similar, but they seem similar in my opinion, and because one of them talks about, let's see, so intelligent design according to this, is a theory that posits that certain features of the universe and of living things are best explained by intelligent cause rather than undirected process like natural selection. Well, now that I read this, that kind of complicates things for me when it comes to discussing that in evolution. But what I do know well about intelligent design is that, there's got to be somebody behind anything that was crafted. So since in the religious sense, it's got to be created by somebody beyond the boundary of the natural world, and then the immortal world, or the world that that God himself is in. And so one good example that that I was reminded of is let me put it this way. So let's say you go to a friend's house who has kids, and you see a piece of artwork that one of them has made and had put on the wall, and it's got maybe pencil or crayon markings or both, and got cotton balls and some other kinds of stuff on it, and the parents hung it on the wall, their living room or somewhere else in their house, and you believe somebody would have actually made that. Somebody's got to be behind that unique piece of artwork done by a child, but you just don't know who it is yet. You just don't know who it is. And he asked the parent who made this piece of artwork that you have here. And then the parent says it was either my son or my daughter, and he or she is the one who crafted this piece that you're looking at. And so it couldn't be nothing that had made the piece of artwork you see there. And it's got to be, so you knew it was somebody who crafted it, but you didn't know who it was yet until you ask somebody who the artist was, and then you know who it is. So it's kind of like the same way in how they believe the earth was created, and somebody has to know how the earth was created, in the non-scientific sense, and then in the religious level, and yeah, and you again, because somebody they believe they do believe it is behind the crafting of our planet, and then the entire and the rest of the universe, and
Right.
so the
By the way, the
creationist.
artist was Banksy.
I'm sorry.
I was joking. I said the artist was Banksy, and then the art was automatically destroyed.
Yeah. Then
Okay.
the creationists believe, well, that they believe that it like so according to this, it is a belief system that posits the universe and life were created by a divine being, often God, and the Bible doesn't say anything about evolution, and it doesn't say anything either for or against evolution. And what was I going to say? Oh yes, so and you have the belief that also by some people that the earth was created like thousands of years ago instead of millions or billions. Is it billions of years ago?
The Earth is 4.6 billion years old. I started in the bless you, the Hadean eon. So
yeah. Anyways, Anyway, so but well, some of them like do believe that that they acknowledge that there were dinosaurs and there's proof of that, and that is like, and especially as well as like there's proof that Galileo has proved that that there were planets, like, well, they're not just Galileo, but the astronomers proved that there were other planets out there, and not to mention his proof that after Copernicus that the Earth was not the center of the universe, and that nothing circled around it except for the moon, and the moon, along with the other planets, circles around the sun itself. And the Catholic Church at the time didn't acknowledge it, and they thought it was heresy or blasphemy or something like that, and he was for the rest of his life placed on house arrest. And maybe if England were like that back in Charles Darwin's time, maybe no doubt he could have suffered the same thing, but I'm not sure.
Or wars. Or like Kepler, yeah, definitely. Probably put to death at one point, depending on.
Well, not be put to death like
yeah,
Copernicus.
I know, but I'm saying if it happened before that, yeah, 300 years earlier, yeah, the consequences would be much more dire. I'm just guessing kind of here what could have happened, but yeah, luckily him and like Galileo, obviously he got house arrest too. So as a matter of fact, he went blind eventually from looking, I think, at the sun so often when he was studying the stars. So
yeah, they didn't have the right inventions back then like they do now, where you got the right amount of like lenses or the lens coverings where you can put it on a certain part of the telescope and be able to look at the sun without it ruining without them ruining your ability to see, without it making you blind.
Yeah. And people got to understand that, of course, there's not going to be science in the Bible or even evolution, and because,
like I said,
it's only about 500 years old. It's about the science is, starting during the Renaissance, that modern science that we know of, that's when that started, and it's just like you can't. They couldn't have a debate on that stuff if they didn't know about it.
Yeah.
It's kind of
silly, like I said, the Bible doesn't say anything for or against evolution. It doesn't say anything about it. And like among the Christians that believe the same thing I was just mentioning earlier about creationism are the Jehovah's Witnesses. So they believe that there were dinosaurs and they acknowledge that they were there, and then maybe Adam and Eve became the first humans at this certain point, and then we came from them beyond that. But they don't acknowledge evolution. And I was reading in a really good book about a guy in his autobiography. Excuse me, I don't know why I'm stuttering a little bit in this podcast here, so I do apologize. But anyway, this gentleman wrote an autobiography, stating that he was like he was experiencing how his parents felt once they found out that the school he went to was teaching evolution, and he himself and his family were Jehovah's Witnesses, and they ended up going to the school and arguing with maybe the principal or just certain members of the staff about it, or maybe the principal and other people together. I don't remember, but that's how it happened, and it did happen. And yeah, you'll get like people besides those in the JW organization who are going to be doing things like that upon schools. But they's like, you shouldn't be teaching my son or daughter or whoever else
I want an
this
alternative
stuff.
class. I want an alternative. I need to take them out for that lesson. You can't teach me them that. Yeah, right. Well, go find and teach them yourself then.
Did you see that?
Anyway, the number 5.
Yeah. So let's see. I don't know how much time we have here, but
I guess we got. Okay.
But
I do want to
anyways,
go back to.
hold on. I'm trying to make this darn thing bigger, back to its normal size.
I was trying to say that word. It's actually a very long word. It's one that Charles Lyell came up with. Was the whole idea of uniformitarianism, and that like it was a contrast of the creationist ideas, the first paleontologists of catastrophism, that there's always been these animals here all this time. Humans were always here. There's the catastrophism, the extinctions that create the periods, and that's why you don't see dinosaurs and other things anymore, and that's why we're here, and they're not, but we were always here.
Yeah. They'll always be here, but in the way of fossils, but unless we do a Jurassic Park thing. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah. And actually, I wanted to kind of a revelation to most people. We didn't actually evolve from apes, because phylogenetically we are actually still apes. It's our morphology that is now different, because a few factors, the fusion of our chromosome 2, the 2A and 2B. We have 46 chromosomes. Apes have 46. And it's kind of why we look different. Also kind of unique for hominins, for great apes. Otherwise, very few actually primates have this, and we lost the baculum bibillum. It's a kind of a bone that's in mammals. There are a lot of mammals, let's say placentals, for the genitalia, for females and males. So that has been lost. There's one other primate I know of that doesn't have that, and that's the spider monkeys, and possibly even the woolly monkeys. I got to get more research on that. That's true, but those are New World monkeys. So, all right. You pull it up right now?
Yeah, I'm trying to find out what the time limit is for Microsoft Teams here.
Yeah.
Let's see. 60 minutes. So we got like about, so never mind the 5-minute warning. We got like about maybe 11 minutes left.
Yeah, we started
or 20 minutes. Or 20 minutes.
Yeah.
So we're good. I just looked it up. So never mind the 5-minute warning here. Yeah, but yeah. So what do you mean that we didn't come from apes? So, well, I don't really think about that all the time anyway.
Put distance. It's a terminology. Like, you can't leave your own group. Just like we're still Sarcopterygian fish, those 3-eyed fish like coelacanths and lungfish, but there's only 8 species of them left in the ocean. But on land, if you include tetrapods, there's a lot. We still have those features, and we still have that third eye, sort of, where what's left of it is fused, but that's their pineal gland. That's part of that, and it's fused in our, like in our brain, and it's part, that third eye is kind of still in our skull. Those plates are still there, those bones, but it's been fused closed. It's just that part of the lobe fins that eventually formed our hands and feet and our legs and arms. Yeah.
One thing I remember is I've seen images of the difference in the texture of skulls in comparison of a human skull to apes. So I've seen like those in the prehistoric times where the bottom part, like where your mouth is actually much more bigger than where your noggin is, and then as time went by, the brain got bigger, and then the mouth got shorter.
Right, and then you went from being more squared like other apes, and then it became more rounded. And a side group that we compete up with, like we now call them paranthropus, those like Robustus and Boisei, they went in their group. Instead of getting bigger brains, they got more modified teeth. They're actually more hominin teeth than ours was, and they ate bark and stuff. They were herbivorous, and they looked kind of more like gorillas. They had that sagittal crest, attaches muscles to the top of the head, and they looked very strong and upright. But they went in a different direction. We became more erect, straight up where the brain stem is right in the center, of the skull. And so, the foramen that's eventually became at the center of the skull, and that's how we be able to get more taller, more upright, and be able to get around much easier, and kind of helped with our success, and eventually develop a bigger brain. Homo erectus, I think, was the fully first erect human that we know of.
Yeah, my the same friend I just mentioned, he was saying, how we could not have evolved from primates because their feet are just like our hands, and
right.
And it couldn't have gotten that way. But as I've learned in the past that micro evolution happens in a much more faster pace than it does in the macro level. And because how the continents are moving in the same speed as the growth of our fingernails, right?
Right. Well, depending on which continent, because of tectonic plates, obviously the Pacific Ocean is shrinking a lot faster than, say, the Atlantic Ocean is probably expanding. But
anyway, it's happening much slower than. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it's happening. I know I just mentioned this before, but it's happening much slower than the movement of the continents.
Right. Yeah, that's true. And a lot of people that said they don't believe in evolution, they accept microevolution more than they accept macro. They just like, okay, yeah, that makes sense to me. But a whale coming from relative to a cow or pig or deer, that doesn't make sense to me. Even though the evidence that is in the fossil record and the double pulley, parts of the leg, those things that belong to whales, ancestors of whales, and they're even to ungulates. That's still there, but they don't, see it that way. It's just too much.
Well, we just can't see it. We just absolutely can't see it.
Yeah, we can't. See
I would believe
even with
that
the vestigial stuff. Yeah,
I would believe that it does happen. According to the evidence. I just didn't have the same observation and thought it as you did. And
right.
But again, the micro world does signal that it is going on, but there's just different speeds at different levels.
Yeah, they actually did not know where whales what's relative was until they did a blood antigen test, and I don't know what the animal was, or if it was a deer or something, but then they found out, it's like, that's weird.
Yeah, that's a really good way to be able to. That's a really good way to be able to help any of us make sense of this whole process and how it took so much time, longer than we've been here on this earth, to go from one stage to the stage that it is now for any creature living on this planet, including whales,
Right.
and how they
Yeah,
went
because they
from
didn't
land
have
to
any.
water.
Yeah, they didn't have that information. They did not know about Pakicetus or Mesonicids and other, land whales at the time because they were just kind of just guessing here. What was that? But using a scientific method, they were able to figure out something back then. And I don't know. It's just interesting. It's really people that remember it that it's like, well, if dinosaurs if we evolved from certain animal, it's like, well, then why does that animal still exist and we also exist? Like, one time I told that person, it's like, you didn't draw your trees. People don't forget, like, you have to draw those trees, those cladistical trees, and see where things branch off. And he's like, oh, like it's as if a light hit him, and just like, yeah, you gotta see how things that, because not only other animals are evolving in one direction, we're still evolving, and they also are still evolving. We get involved from each other. They're our cousins. They are come from a common ancestor that's totally different than both of us. And that's the one thing that people got to realize. It's not as simplistic as that. And
The one thing I want to
even
share is, if you ever remember reading in the book of Genesis, the same order of when and which creatures came first and came next and so on, is that, there's, it's saying that God had first created the fish of the sea, and then came the land animals. So apparently, it like whatever the Bible is saying and how the creation process happened and in what order, it shows that it seems to be going in the same order as what the fossil record suggests. Like the fish did come first, then came land. So like the way that prehistory had went in order at the time, long before we came along, is that it's in what's that word? It's in parallel. So the fish first, like the first forms of life first appearing in the ocean waters, it seems to be, and then what came next, it seems to be once again in parallel to the same order that was mentioned in like the very first book, the very first chapters or verses of the book of Genesis.
Right, in the first book, yes. Yeah, that is interesting. I think we even talked about that. Like, people are like, well, we came from ash, not water. I'm like, well, where did water come from? It came from ash, which came from volcanoes and the earth. And so that's the thing. And it's just like whether you're Christian or atheist or agnostic or Jewish, or it doesn't matter. Ash is where we came from, and that's where we go. And then if you think about it, it's just ours has more steps to it, and we just know all the other steps. It's just how the universe creates, and then you become part of the heavens and you go to the stars, and that's the thing. It's like it's just a different way of looking at it.
Yeah, so like after the Big Bang, and like the stars came, like it's like all the stuff that's just like in such an amazing way, and how we found out this stuff. Again, it's in the order that we know about in the scientific world, that happens from like beginning to present day. I mean, or from beginning to a certain time in prehistory, such as like before or after the Cambrian period. Again, it's happening. Like, it shows that things happened in the same parallel as what was mentioned in the first chapter and the first verses again of the book of Genesis. So like first came the fish, then God created the animals on land, and then the birds, and then on and on it goes.
Yeah. Actually, I think it was funny that when you're talking about your friend, like, like apes and humans, Lucy had something that was kind of in between the feet. I mean, her pelvis was a lot like ours. I mean, she didn't walk like we did, but her feet were kind of like she had a little bit of manipulation with the thumb toe, the big toe. It was kind of a little bit like a thumb between like an ape. It could have a little bit of manipulation, but it was also better for walking than an ape would. A human, like, it go back and forth between the trees and the ground. So, but I thought that was kind of cool if you ever look at that thing. So, yeah. So, I think it is like, I mean, there's a lot of parallels. I think even in other beliefs as well, to be going beyond Catholic and Christian. I mean, other forms of Christianity. You'll find those kind of things that they share a similar understanding of the world, and I don't know. I think it's very enlightening, to kind of look at that way, and it helps people understand that things are not that far off, and they're not always contrasting with your own personal values. So, anything else that you want to share?
Well, we got less than 10 minutes left, so
okay.
Do you want to make a conclusion, or should I? Or
I think we both could if you want to wrap. I think I think people got to understand that in this, it also depends on how private or how open you want to be about your personal beliefs, and that a lot of things that, especially in science or even other fields, that they're not always contrasting. And I think the more you open it up to learning ideas and understanding them, it's not really about converting or something, or trying to go against your own personal values or beliefs. It's about understanding things. It's not so much important, like, because it's not about believing science. It's not about believing in evolution. It's about understanding it. It's really understanding those concepts and stuff like that. Because we don't convert people to science or evolution. It's just how those are tools to understanding how the world works and how other things work in the world, and it helps you develop, make connections, like links in your brain, how the things go. So, I mean, I think it's just great is to look at the world objectively, instead of subjectively. So, I think that's all I got to say for my conclusion. But, Jordy, I'm going to let you take the final note, and yeah.
Okay, so the last thing I want to share in order to conclude this second half is for anybody who is listening, and I might have said this in the first half too, but if I did, as I said before, I would like everyone to know that we all have our different beliefs and views of what we believe, what we acknowledge and deny, depending on one or various other reasons. And I do respect their beliefs, and just as long as you respect mine, I just don't want anybody, just keep in mind, and as often as you can, to refrain from starting an argument with anybody on what you believe about this or about that, and we won't have to argue back with you. So don't argue with either one of us, and we won't argue with you. But if you do, we will argue with you. But don't say who can win or who can lose, because that's telling somebody what they can and cannot do. So again, don't start an argument with anybody, and we won't argue with you. And at the same time, just don't tell what they can and cannot do when it comes to saying that you cannot win or lose in an argument. And if you are going to show a sign, I know I said like don't start an argument with anybody, but if you show a sign about the defiance of evolution, then I'm going to, as best I can, approach you and tell you kindly that's something that maybe you should reconsider, or at least know what I believe and take into consideration of what is best, like signifying the process of evolution. And evidence, in my opinion, seems to be showing proof, or at least a piece, or just some like portion of whatever size of proof that it is in, like I said, an ongoing process, and the process is like working 24/7 around the clock, and it's moving 24/7 around the clock. But again, you can stay entitled to your beliefs, and I'll stay entitled to mine. But again, I know I'm repeating this, but this is the last time I'm going to say it. Don't argue with me or anybody else. Don't start like a debate with me or anybody else about what you believe, and don't shove it down their throat.
I mean, if they debate me, I'll debate back, but in a civil, respectful manner. But yes, I agree that it's not time for ad hominems or name thing. It's like people don't want to use fallacies or kind of false debates, or I don't know how you say it. They're called stupid arguments. That's what they are, stupid arguments. So yeah, okay. Anyway, so my end. Jordy, any last words? Or
I can't think of any last words, or I would like to say, so anybody who has listened, I deeply give you my thanks for listening to both me and Dylan's conversation, and listening to us share with you on our thoughts of evolution. And you can go ahead and leave in the comments or email me, which the address I will give at the ending segment. And depending on what your views of evolution are, go ahead and share them with me, and I'll be happy to maybe I will reply, or maybe I won't, but no matter, or at least instead I will let you know in a reply, if I do reply, that I totally understand how you feel, and whatever that me and my recurring co-host had just said, take nothing that we said personally, and just don't take things the wrong way. Okay, that is all I got for you on this episode, and thank you so much for listening. If you have any suggestions of what topics to talk about on this podcast, or comments, you can leave me an email at thelivingfossilpodcast@gmail.com. Again, that's thelivingfossilpodcast@gmail.com. The address will be in the description. You can also leave me an email or leave me comments to give me feedback on what improvements to make and what I can do better. Be sure to follow me on Spotify and my Facebook page, the Living Fossil Facebook page, as well as my LinkedIn page for this podcast. Once again, thank you so much for listening, and I hope to see you in the next episode.